Now, for Anthony Albanese and many of those who believe in radical, extreme climate action here in Australia, they believe that there's a Jedi mind trick, just like Obi-Wan Kenobi. These are not the droids you're looking for. And us, the dumb stormtroopers, will say, these are not the droids we're looking for. And we will simply let them move along, move along. The problem is, when it comes to the powers of a Jedi, Anthony Albanese has about as much connection with the Force as a fat bloke at Comic-Con, a cosplay actor, somebody dressing up like Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'll leave that metaphor here. Because you see, their whole belief about drastic climate change action, their Jedi mind trick is, the private sector will pay it all. You will feel no impact financially. And we're supposed to be the dumb drones who say, move along, move along. If you would like to see this in stunning detail, I'm going to take you through an interview that the Labor leader, Each Way Albo as we call him here, but he's all in on this stupid mistake, gave today with our old mate David Speers over there on Channel 2. I'm going to take this in parts because the details and the number of times the Jedi mind trick was being thrown around was extraordinary. Now remember, his climate policy and his climate target of net zero by 2050 doesn't kick in and doesn't pay off and can't ultimately be measured about whether it is a success or not for another 10 federal elections. I'm talking about the 2022, 25, 27, 30, 33, 36, 41, 44, 47 and then at the 2050 election, when anyone in the parliament will be long, long gone. Roll the tape.
Let's
Good to be here, David.
Start with a pretty important question about this target. Is it economy-wide?
Well, yes, of course it is, because emissions are about energy, they're about transport.
OK, Shorten only really wanted to talk about the costs when it comes to energy. Economy-wide means power, transport, agriculture. Keep going.
The reason I ask that is Labor's pre-election position, the 45% target by 2030, didn't include farmers in particular. Transport was treated differently as well. But you are saying this net zero target will apply to farming and transport as well as energy.
Indeed, and of course one of the things is a net zero is carbon neutral. So it's not just about reducing emissions, it's also about practices that can make a difference in terms of going negative emissions, if you like. And you can do that through agriculture, through forestry, through a range of measures.
Jedi mind trick. It's all about the practices. No, it's about the number of head of cattle. It's about the amount of meat that we will be able to produce and logically eat. The size of our dairy industry, what you can farm, where you can farm, how much you can farm, what we can eat. Keep going.
By 2050, we are going to have to change the way we farm, and we're going to have to change transport, aren't we, if all sectors are affected by this?
Well, transport is changing, David. You know that that's the case.
So what does it look like in 2050?
You know that more people now are catching public transport.
Jedi mind trick. It's not about public transport. To achieve what he is planning for 10 elections' time, between now and 2050, we are talking about completely moving away from the combustion engine, totally embracing technologies such as electric cars. Now, as I've said to you multiple times, the problem with that, the failed Jedi mind trick, is that if you remove the current system of cars, it blows a $20 billion hole in state and federal budgets every single year between now and 2050. How does a government replace that money? Where's the new road user charge, registration fee, access to electricity? Now, I get it. If there's a better technology coming, Australians will embrace it. But it's economy-wide. Agriculture, power, transport. And transport, of course, means how we move bulk goods around our country. Now, while it's great for people who live in the inner city who think that everyone just goes to their shared market garden, the truth is stuff doesn't grow in shops. It has to be driven there. The trucks that are required to move that, let alone everything else involved in producing it, that's what would have to pay. That's what would have to transition. That's what would create the $20 billion revenue hole in state and federal budgets. Nothing to see here. Keep going.
Isn't it honest to say there is going to be a need for transformation in a lot of sectors?
Oh, absolutely. You're right. And what it will be, though, by having a long-term plan. See, Scott Morrison pretends that the world won't change.
See, he didn't even answer. He couldn't even begin to fake answer. He realised, oh, this doesn't work anymore. So he just changes it halfway through the sentence into an attack on the Prime Minister about how the cost of doing nothing is more than the cost of doing something. He can't even answer the question. Now, if you work in a big office, or maybe even a smaller one, if you've worked for a company with more than 20 people in it, you know what transformation means. It doesn't mean everyone gets to play. It means job losses. It means restructuring. Think about this at your place of work. If the boss came in tomorrow morning and sent out an email to all staff, we're prepared to transition this business over the next 6 months. Would you think that you're going to have a job at the end of that 6 months? Anyway, keep going.
This is going to require a huge amount of investment, though. We are talking about an unprecedented transformation across not just energy, but the entire economy.
Well, the Business Council of Australia speaks about $22 billion of investment a year.
Whoa. 22 billion. Now that sounds like a big number, but not a really scary number. But remember, the Jedi mind trick. Move along, is that it makes it seem like it's just a one-off. But as he just said there, it's $22 billion to the Australian economy every year between now and 2050. That's $22 billion every single year, total cost, and remember, the numbers are never as low as they tell you. $660 billion. Now, who do they think is going to pay that? Oh, the private sector will. Oh, so the private sector will take it out of its profits? Good luck if it's a listed company. Remember, the CEO and board, part of their entire board performance is to produce more profit than they did last year. Do you think that the shareholders will be fine saying, it's okay, we're doing it for climate change? Forget your retirement fund. It doesn't work like that. Of course, it gets passed on to customers. So you've got customers now paying more for transport, be it their own or the cost of moving things around our country. You've got governments taking less revenue because of the change in transport, and you've got an agriculture sector that not only will have fewer people working in it, it will have tight regulations about who and what can farm, where they can farm. This is extinction rebellion stuff. And to give you an idea of $660 billion, the entire Australian federal government spending in the last federal budget was $500 billion. $22 billion a year, by the way, to put that in, again, terms of the federal government and what it spends. That's twice the amount of money that we spend on childcare subsidies. It's the entire amount of money that the federal government sends to the states to pay for hospitals. This is not nothing to see here. This is everything to pay here. Now, all of that's fine, of course, if you're a politician. They're not going to be, for carbon footprint reasons, reducing the number of seats in the lower house. They won't be reducing the number of seats around television panel shows for journalists. We won't be reducing the number of people who work in academia. No, it's just going to be an idiot with a truck, a dickhead who chooses to get his hands dirty at work. Anyway, keep going.
CSIRO has also done a bit of work on this.
Right.
It has suggested in an earlier report the electricity system alone will require expenditure of almost $1,000 billion by current service providers, new entrants and customers by 2050 to get to this target. So that's $1 trillion. Does that sound about right?
Well, these are research that's being done, and the CSIRO research, of course, like every other bit of research, shows that there'll be higher growth, higher wages, lower energy costs if we go down this road.
But only if there's this massive investment, and that's what I'm asking you about.
But there will be you know what that's code for, David, when you say massive investment? Massive job creation. That's what it's code for.
Bullshit. Transition means job losses. And they want to pretend that there's a couple of 100,000 beautiful new green jobs that are going to fall out of the sky. There's about 50,000 people who work in coal mining. Albo, in the same interview, by the way, said that the Japanese don't get held accountable for the emissions that are produced from the cars they make, as a way of trying to justify that somehow we wouldn't be held accountable for the emissions when it comes to coal. But that's exactly the reason why new coal mines are being knocked back in Australia. The New South Wales Supreme Court said exactly that thing. We are responsible for those emissions wherever the coal is burnt. That's the system that currently exists in Queensland. Now, the truth is, you have just heard a politician say that under his scheme, his target, his plan, his promise, it's going to cost Australian industry $660 billion. It is going to cost the power companies $1,000 billion. $1.6 trillion is the size of what we are talking about. You would have to be not just Yoda, but baby Yoda as well, with fingers crossed, to be able to think people won't notice that. That we won't notice it as taxpayers, and we won't notice it as customers. Now, by the way, I thought that number of 1 trillion must have been a mispronunciation, must have been somebody accidentally forgetting to carry the one. No, it's a report from 2017. The exact line is worth having a look at there, yeah. $1,000 billion. Of course, they continue with but the cost of doing nothing will cost us more. Honestly, a promise 10 elections in the making that costs $1.6 trillion that will affect everyone in the Australian economy. Roll the tape.
Just to clear this up, you are open to a carbon price or not?
Well, David, we will establish well before the election. But we didn't go to the last election with a price on carbon. What we are open to, David, is plans like the National Energy Guarantee. Now, we would have supported that.
I'm asking you about a carbon price.
We would have supported that. Well, I'm telling you what we support rather than what we don't support.
Okay, but I'm just trying to get it, before I move on, I want to make it clear, we're not getting a very clear answer on this. Are you open to it, yes or no?
Well, what I'm doing, David, is outlining very clearly to you the sort of mechanisms that we would be open to. And one of the things...
Carbon price?
...that we need to do... Well, David, we don't believe that is necessary in terms of we didn't go to the last election with that commitment. And one of the things that you have to ask, David, is what of the cost of inaction?
Now he's just lying. They took to the last election and the election before an emissions trading scheme. Not a fixed price on carbon, but a floating price on carbon. Apparently that's the difference. Every sector. $1.6 trillion. No further details. No commitments. No costings. No plans. In a plan that takes 10 elections to pay off. Now, there are two very clear choices after sitting and watching that interview today, and good on David Speers for the way that he prosecuted it. He is either lying to anyone and everyone who will listen, pushing it so far into the never never that you can just say you're doing something so the people with pink hair will shut up, or he thinks you're stupid, that you don't care, that you don't understand. But the truth is, how many federal elections have we had about what we are willing to pay? Australia is doing something. when it comes to climate change. We have signed up and are all in on the Paris Agreement. The last agreement before that was the Kyoto Protocol. That runs out this year. We met those targets. Instead, people are setting their hair on fire about what we may or may not be doing 10 years from now. And this bloke wants to pretend 2050 is the job that we're hiring him for. Yet, surprise, surprise, because none of this fits the narrative, there was nothing to see about this today. On virtually every news website, they made no reference to anything that I've just told you. You saw nothing tonight on the 6 p.m. news. And that's the scariest part about this Jedi mind trick, is that the peoples whose job it is to call it out are so invested in the trick that they won't call BS on it. I will, and I'm not going anywhere.